Hey guys, so I said last week I was going to talk about fatjoe. I didn't forget, but I had to do some things in between, and I'm not going to lie. Fatjoe, from what I can remember, I don't think I've ever spoken about fatjoe on my channel before, but there are things that I'm going to say on here that some people may not agree with or like, and I totally understand, but I'm definitely going to break it down. What I'm going to talk about is not what most people have talked about from their perspective of hip hop in terms of them claiming to be there at the time or reading and doing research at the time throughout studying the history of hip hop. So, for as a disclaimer, some of you all may agree, some of you might disagree, some of you may love me for it, some of you may hate me for it, and I totally understand, and I'm okay with it. So let's get into this, shall we? Hey everyone, it's your girl, Miss Ann Little Cool. I'm coming to you straight out of NYC, Harlem on this Saturday. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend. Hope you're relaxing, enjoying the last couple of days, I would say, of summer. And hopefully stay out of trouble and you made a lot of money. So, fatjoe has been dragged on Twitter, and rightly so for the most part. When he claims that Latinos and Black created hip-hop 50-50%, he is wrong, okay? Now, I'm going to post a link of the article from, I believe it's Hip Hop DX. I'm not going to read it because I feel that it's going to be redundant. It's going to be things talked about over and over again. What I'm going to talk about is the fact of why fatjoe now all of a sudden is coming out with the 50-50% analogy about Blacks and Latinos creating hip-hop, when in fact he's not really truthfully telling the truth of the hip-hop history in terms of the timelines. And why did he say Latinos when in fact, if he at least wanted to make his argument very precise and very concrete, he would have said, even though it's not true, he would have said Blacks and Puerto Ricans, 50-50. He would have said foundational Black Americans and Puerto Ricans, 50-50. The problem is, fatjoe is basing hip-hop off of the 1973 year, where mainstream media claims that's the year that hip-hop was created and birthed. So I'm going to go on a timeline, and then I'm going to go back to fatjoe's comments. Hip-hop is not a art form where you can say it was created at 73 or it was created 68 or it was created in 66. Hip-hop is really like a bowl of gumbo. This is an analogy I'm making. When you make gumbo, you put okra, you put spices, your peppers, your salt. You put in other vegetables. If you're making shrimp gumbo, you got to have your shrimp. Sometimes if you make fish gumbo, you put your gumbo in. But gumbo is basically a combination of different vegetables, different spices, and different meats. That is how hip-hop is. With hip-hop, you have the art form before anything. You have the backbone of it, which is the poetry, the rap and the rhyming. Then you have your dancing. Then you have your militancy. Then you have the artistics of hip-hop. Then you have the production musically, the music production, okay? Now, I said gumbo for one reason, because gumbo is a foundational Black American created cuisine. That's the same thing with hip-hop. Through the years, gumbo has, had different interpretations. You have gumbo that originally has come out of Louisiana. Some people have said that it comes from South Carolina. I know where my mother's family's from and where my father's family's from. Gumbo is big, particularly not just Louisiana, but anywhere near the Gulf of Mexico, i.e. Mobile, Alabama, Dothan, Biloxi, Mississippi, and near eastern southern Texas, okay? Now, gumbo is the official state cuisine of Louisiana. And I love me some gumbo. Also, sausages can be in gumbo. Rice is in gumbo. It's so many different things. But the earliest form of what we would see and come to know as hip hop started off with the dancing. If you look at old video clips from the 1890s, like the mid 1890s, you will see black men and women doing something that is similar to the Soul Train line, where they're going down on line, doing splits, doing steps that you would see, which is reminiscent of early clips of early hip hop. Okay? Then you see like some head spins. Then you seeing people doing something that's kind of similar to like the Roger Rabbit, doing splits and things like that. Then as we come about to the age of sound, post 1929, we're seeing gospel artists rhyming, okay? Gospel artists are rhyming. Then we're seeing more of this and hearing more of it. By the 1950s, it's coming into mainstream movies. Case in point, the Nicholas brothers, many of the steps they did was seen in early hip hop, believe it or not, especially when they was defying gravity. Also, there was a song back in 1962, and it was called The Name Game. And I believe her name was Shirley, because somebody posted it on my page. And I want to shout out the person that did that. Her name is Shirley Ellis. And she was rhyming. She was rapping, even though she's a singer. And she had this song called, in 1964, called The Name Game. And it was like Banana Fana Fo Fana. Okay? And she was using names like Lincoln. And she would put a spin on it and like changing for Lincoln and all that stuff. And it was a big hit. Okay? It was a big hit. It was number 3 on the Billboard 100 and number 4 back in 1965. And Shirley Ellis was, now I want to say this though, okay? And I want to make this clear. Shirley Ellis was a person who was born in the Bronx, and she does have West Indian heritage, okay? Her father was from Montserrat, and her mother was from Bahamas. But there is a catch to this. What she was doing, she wasn't doing it from her heritage in terms of being from her West Indian parents. What she was doing in the song basically was a lot of games that black Southern children would play when they was bringing up those games from the South, coming to places like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and so forth. So that was something she grew up with, coming in contact with foundational Black American culture, and putting a spin on it and singing the name game. Now, we never basically heard her diss foundational Black Americans. Yes, she was a one-hit wonder, but we never heard her diss any of us. Now, she passed away in 2005 and so forth. And, that's what happened. But to be fair, she was born in New York, but she was West Indian. Okay. But still, what she was doing was the name game song. That was foundational Black Americans singing those songs, playing those games growing up, especially if they came straight from the South and moved up north. So I want to say that. Now, going into other singers, you had Isaac Hayes. He was rhyming a lot. You have the lady, Jackson, Millie Jackson. She rhymed a lot on her songs. She's from Georgia. Moving into the 70s, into the Bronx, you have Disco King Mario that was born in Durham, North Carolina and moved to New York. A lot of the pioneers of hip hop come from North and South Carolina. This is true. Where it comes with the whole thing with Kool Herc, I want to make this clear. Kool Herc was born in Jamaica, but he came here when he was 12. Kool Herc never brought over a sound system. Kool Herc was 12 years old. He came here on a plane. You couldn't bring a sound system to America on a plane. You would have had to basically bring it to a separate cargo and probably would have had to ship it. And a 12-year-old wasn't going to bring parents wasn't going to let him bring no sound system over here. And the sound system that they were using, their sound systems were literally 2 decades behind ours. That's a known fact. Now, the reason why they give Kirk this claim that he created hip hop, which he didn't do, what he did was he extended a break and he was playing to a crowd of children and youth. Whereas the other people who were DJs, they played to a more sophisticated crowd. But the reason why the media gave it to him was because, and this is going to rub the wrong people, they gave it to him because of him being of an immigrant background. And they wanted to make this art form. They wanted to give it to someone who was an immigrant. Now, before 1993, they never said that Jamaicans created hip hop. They said it came from the Bronx with other DJs. He was always mentioned, but they never said that. But they never mentioned Latinos as well. But the one person that really got cut out was Disco King Mario. And all of them learned from him. Now, going into the Latino comment that fatjoe made. In the beginning of the whole DJing culture, particularly in the 1960s, Latinos were doing their own thing. They were doing their own thing with the different styles of music, salsa, mambo, and they were very much involved in bossa nova, which was a big sound coming out of Brazil. And it became popular because rich white people couldn't vacation in Cuba anymore. So they found a new destination with Brazil. And this whole sound of bossa nova became really big. And many people were becoming involved in it because it was a huge moneymaker. So if you went to the Copacabana downtown, you would hear bossa nova everywhere. So a lot of people that played bossa nova music, they weren't just whites. They were Puerto Rican and Cuban, but mainly Puerto Rican besides being Brazilian. Also, a new sound was coming into New York called merengue and bachata. That's from the Dominicans, okay? So they were more in tune with their culture. Now, that's not to say that you didn't have a couple of Puerto Ricans that were, involved in the music scene of what we know as hip hop. But what it is that they didn't create it. It is a Black American art form. Okay? And as I mentioned, the lady Shirley Ellis, she did create the Name Game song. She wrote that song. Okay? And she wrote it with another man who had a West Indian background, but they don't say the country. They just say that he was West Indian. But they were born in New York, and they grew up being around foundational Black Americans. And if you heard what I said on my live, Bahamians, which is what Shirley's mother was, Trinidadians or Asians, always were around Black American kids. Unlike Jamaicans, they were separate. They never really hung out with us. But Puerto Ricans by the 1940s and really by the 50s, they did. Now I'm going to what fatjoe says with the people that were involved and contribute. Those people were there. I knew about them. He's not lying. If you look at footage from the late 70s, you start to see more Puerto Ricans involved in hip hop. He's not lying about that. He's also not lying about the friendships that blacks and Puerto Ricans had. But where he was wrong was he didn't state blacks with American backgrounds and Puerto Ricans. He made it like Latinos as all Latinos. And then he made it like all blacks when that wasn't the case, because Jamaicans as a whole was not down with hip hop. Haitians weren't down with hip hop. Other groups of people were not down with hip hop. It was just the individuals. The same thing with with Puerto Ricans. It was just groups of Puerto Ricans that were down with it, but more Puerto Ricans were involved in hip hop than West Indians. It's just that they use the three, which is Kirk, which is the Grandmaster Flash, and Africa Bambaataa as the Holy Trinity, which is not the case. Besides them, there wasn't any others. But what the record labels, as I said, wanted to do in the media specifically, they wanted to take away hip hop as a foundational Black American created art form and give it to immigrants because they were trying to thin us out of pretty much existing culturally. You understand? And Tariq Nasheed does a very good commentary on ethnic cleansing, which is culturally. Like, you can't just, kill off the people. What you can do is you can basically say, we don't want you guys to exist culturally. Because if you get rid of them culturally, then they won't exist at all. Because what the media did with hip hop, unlike jazz, rhythm and blues, and other forms of music, they made it a regional art form. They made it like, look, this comes out of New York. Unlike with jazz, they never said, oh, jazz, it comes from Louisiana. Oh, no, it comes from Black people. And it started in Louisiana. They could have said, well, hip hop, it came from Black people out of New York. Had they said that, we wouldn't have the problems today. But they made it a regional thing. Now, here's the flip side of this. While hip hop was brewing in California, in New York, you had it also brewing in California. You had the pop and lockers. You had DJs out there. You had rhyming out there, rapping and everything. Because you see, there was one thing going on in both places. You had resistance. You had revolutionary people. You had the Black Panthers. You had all these militant groups. So really, that's why I say with pot of gumbo, with hip hop, in order to have hip hop, you have to have a form of activism and militancy, resistance of being oppressed and of cooning. This is why I say there's no way that hip hop can come from, and I'm going to say it can't come from the British colonies, because the Queen has just passed away, but you got states, nations, and commonwealths crying for this woman. You got Jamaica mourning for 12 days. And no disrespect to my Jamaicans subs and my Jamaican listeners and my Jamaican friends and, acquaintances, but we ain't doing that. We don't even do that for our leaders here like that. And that's not hip hop. To mourn for a person who pretty much oppressed you all and kept you all poor. That's not hip hop. So when I saw that, I'm like, this really proves everything about hip hop not coming from the Caribbean at all. This is why I say you got to really do research and you got to pay attention, because now California is coming out with a documentary about their creation with hip hop and how it really came out of California, and that mean the people in New York was watching them do the moves with dances and so forth. But the reason why they refuse to give hip hop a claim in, creating the art form and originating a lot of things as well is because Californians guard a lot of things they create. And that's because you have the Texan, Louisiana, Arkansas, Trinity. They don't play about this stuff. They not a sharing all lives matter people. Whereas in New York, you have the Carolinas, where they're very free-hearted and giving. So they basically all lives matter, their culture and things they created. Whereas, oh yeah, you can come in, they welcome people. They'll invite you to their house in South and North Carolina, particularly South Carolinians. Okay? But whereas Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas people, they ain't friendly like that. So that's why when it comes to pop and locking, they will not include popping and locking into the art form of hip hop. But it's very much hip hop. A lot of the stuff they do, they was doing popping and locking overseas before hip hop was introduced overseas, with like the breakdancing. Mind you, if fatjoe wanted to really mention Latinos that created hip hop that was involved in it, he could have mentioned Shabba-Doo Quinones, whose mother was black, foundational black American, and father's Puerto Rican. But he didn't mention him. He mentioned all of them that came out of where? The Bronx. Because really, at the end of the day, they want to make it a New York art form. And this is why hip-hop messed up the way it did. Because you didn't make it about the heritage of the people who created it. You made it regional. You wanted to make it an all New York thing. You could have mentioned Shabba-Doo. He's Puerto Rican. His last name's Quinones. But he won't mention it because he came from Chicago and then moved to California. Had he came from the Bronx or like anywhere in New York, he would have repped him. But he didn't. So that's why I'm calling cap on that. You just wanted to make it come out of New York to make New York big. Because you don't want to give credit to foundational black Americans. And that's my problem with the whole narrative of the creation of hip hop. And with the whole Tariq Nasheed documentary, I believe that it's going to not just debunk the whole lies of it, but that Universal Hip Hop Museum is going to have to do a whole lot of re-editing, okay? And they have to include Disco King Mario. If he's not there, then the Hip Hop Museum is a bunch of lies. It's a thieving culture, hip hop, of what it became when the corporations got it, because you didn't guard it properly. You could say what you want to about hip hop out on the West Coast, but it ain't no thieving. You ain't never heard of any rappers stealing music from other rappers out there, because we all know in California how the repercussions would be. Like I said, it got a lot of Texas, Louisiana heritage in them. That's a lot of outlaw. That's an outlaw, type of system out there. So they would handle it. So they wouldn't do that. But up here, they do that because a lot of them have a background of piracy. Okay? A lot of them have a pirate culture. And I'm not talking about people from New York. I'm talking about a lot of people from Caribbean. They have a pirate culture. Pirates of the Caribbean. Very important movie to watch, because you'll understand what happened to music and hip hop, which is why they put that disclaimer, that anti-privacy law was stealing. And that's what pretty much is my take on it. So I wanted to give a breakdown about it. And I want to say the Name Game song is still good. Shirley Ellis is no longer here. Yes, I know people was saying that she was foundational black American, but she wasn't. She was first generation American and she was West Indian. But still, the Name Game song was a good song. I used to sing it and stuff, but her interpretation of that is influenced by Southern and foundational black American music and those games growing up with kids in the South. So if you have any comments, you can basically write it in the comment section of this video. However, you can also like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you like. Please do. And hit the notification bell to receive notices about future uploads and lives. And thank you for taking the time out to listen. I know I said a lot, but I wanted to give a concise breakdown. And I'll be back tomorrow. Later.